So welcome. This is Kim Knight here from KimKnightHealth.com, and this is our introduction to emotional mastery. And just to introduce myself, I am a health and empowerment coach, and I help women who do too much and value themselves too little to get their life back. And those people may either be unhappy, or they may have lots of different problems turning up in their life, or they may be critically and chronically ill. And there are different levels of the spectrum where we can find ourselves if we have been literally running ourselves into the ground. So those are the type of women that I tend to help, and I help women who are really ready to make a change. So the purpose of this introductory series, which is part of a much bigger series, is to show that managing and mastering our emotions is absolutely vital for health and happiness and success in life. And I've really learned this through personal experience. And as I'm going to share in a moment, it's been a long journey to understand this information. And also in this series, to give you some information to help you manage emotions. And a lot of the information that I'm going to be giving is really awareness about emotions, because we can be quite unaware about emotional stuff. And also to introduce you to a brand new signature program on how to really become the master of your emotional well-being, because this is absolutely so critical for our health, our happiness, and our overall enjoyment of our life. And as they say, life is not a dress rehearsal. You know, we're here to live life now. And so many people are unconsciously putting their life off and thinking, well, tomorrow. But at some point there will be no tomorrow, and we need to make the most of today. So in today's webinar, what we're going to be looking at is the steps I took to manage and master emotions, which resulted in me recovering from chronic depression and illness, how and why emotions are generated in the body, and how they get stuck in the body. And I'll probably be talking about a lot of other things as well, but that's the main gist of this webinar today. And in the other webinars, I'll be talking about which organs are affected by emotions and a connection between the brain and the emotions. So we're setting up the information. This is very important foundation information in this first webinar. And I do recommend that you watch everything in sequence. So how did I learn to manage and master emotions, and how did that result in me recovering from chronic depression and illness? So I'm not going to go into too long a story here, because I have shared it in other videos and other webinars, and you can go and probably find that somewhere else. But essentially, in my late 20s, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, and the funny thing was, I didn't even know that I was depressed. I had no idea. I thought that I was, just living a normal life. And so I discovered that I had this thing called depression, which I'd never heard of. And I started seeing a counselor and started to learn that I had these things called feelings, which I never knew. And then I worked with that counselor for a short while, but she wasn't really the right person for me. And then I moved on to another counselor who was much better, who really started to help me to look inwards into myself and discover that there was a world inside me rather than just a world outside of me. And nobody had ever actually told me that. I'd really, really disconnected from myself without knowing it. And that's what we all do, especially if we're unhappy or we're ill, then we must have disconnected from ourselves in some way. And so I thought I was doing okay, but the depression just got worse and worse and worse, and I ended up quitting my job and actually then ended up in hospital for a couple of weeks, and really got to the bottom of the pit, so to speak, and slowly started to pull my way back up. So when people talk about having severe depression and being in a hole or in a dark tunnel with no light in sight, then I really know what they're talking about. And I started to pull myself together after that and get on with life, but still I had not really addressed the core issues. I'd started to look at things, but I'd definitely not resolved them. But I didn't really know that. I was just doing the best that I could. And I moved to New Zealand shortly after that. And a few years later, I got chronic fatigue. Basically, I was, over a period of a year, I was getting more and more tired. And one day I just quit my job. And I spent the next 5 years looking for answers and trying 140 different therapies to find out why was I tired, but nothing was giving me the answer. And one day when I was lying in bed, really beginning to think that I may never get better because nothing was working, and 140 therapies is quite a lot of therapies to try, and nobody seemed to be able to give me an answer, I thought to myself, what would I do if I only had a few months to live? Because maybe that's, for some reason I just thought maybe I'm just not going to get better. Because when you're ill for a long time, it's quite a logical thing to start thinking. And so I decided that even though I was ill, if I only had a few months to live, then the thing that I wanted to do was to travel around the world. And so I sold my house and I set off around the world. And I was actually still looking for answers. I didn't really realize that at the time, but I was. And so I tried even more therapies in all sorts of different countries, and still nothing was working. But right at the end of that trip, I found the answer. And the answer was the fact that I was suppressing my emotions, but I didn't know I was. And because emotions are energy, I'm going to talk about that later, because emotions are energy, it was taking a lot of energy to hold that energy inside me. And so I was holding all my energy inside me and suppressing it and using a lot of energy to do that. And that was exhausting me, because it takes a lot of energy to suppress or not deal with emotions. It is exhausting. It also takes a lot of energy and uses a lot of energy to have emotional outbursts. So such as sadness or anger, that actually uses a lot of energy in the body as well. And ultimately is not a healthy thing to do. But won't be covering that on this introductory series. That will be more when we get into the main signature program, because that's quite in-depth information. I then realized I had a light bulb turning point moment where, after 5 years of searching, I found out that, I actually have lots of energy. It's not that I don't have any energy, although I feel like I don't have any energy. I actually have heaps of energy, but I've been stuffing it all down and suppressing it, like holding a basketball underwater. So I started learning techniques, meditation techniques and bodywork techniques to clear emotional energy from the body, because emotional energy is literally stored in every cell of the body, and it also gravitates to particular organs inside of the body. So I studied literally every day, and I practiced every day for the next 7 years. I practiced these techniques, and I really learned how to understand emotions and how to clear them, and how to be able to clear them literally in seconds or minutes. And after a few years, I could then say that I was well. And in that process, over that period of time, I trained in a couple of different therapies professionally, not because I wanted to be a practitioner, but because I was healing myself. And by the time I felt better, I thought, well, I'll start offering this to other people. So that was how I started working as a practitioner. And since then, I could say that I've probably tried nearly 200 therapies in total for myself, just to experience them or train in them at a minor level. And I've personally trained professionally in about 20 different methods. And all these methods have a real focus on emotional clearing and emotional transformation. So it seems that somehow or other I have learned a lot about how to manage emotions, and that is why I'm developing this new signature program, because it's really 25 years of personal research, if you like, all consolidated into this program. So why do we need to manage emotions? Well, for sure, it will lead to happiness and health. And if you ask yourself, as we go through this webinar, I'm going to be asking questions, and I want you to really ask those questions to yourself. How much do you enjoy life if you're feeling angry or sad or afraid or depressed? And it's one thing to experience that occasionally, but if we're experiencing this a lot, that's a whole other thing. And that will really severely impact our enjoyment of life. And how can you allow yourself to have what you want if you're feeling, for example, guilty or ashamed all the time? If we have guilt and shame and feelings of I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy, then it doesn't matter how much we want a nice partner, a nice job, money, success, happiness, whatever, we simply will not allow ourselves to have it because it goes against the belief that is in our unconscious. And we certainly cannot be happy if we're suppressing all our feelings all the time. So I'd like to ask you, when you grew up, what were you taught about emotions, either consciously or unconsciously? And usually, to be honest, this is unconscious, and especially the first few years of life when we're really programmed in the first 7 years of life. That is when we are programmed as a human being, but we don't know we're being programmed because at that age, we're emotional beings. We're not intellectual beings. Our intellect doesn't kick in until we're about 7. I mean, it does kick in a bit before that, but really the training of the intellect doesn't start until after 7 because we go in 7-year cycles of development as a human being. And the first 7 years of life are when we're really programmed and conditioned into our beliefs and our behaviors. So when you grew up, what were you taught about feelings? What were you taught about feelings? And how did your parents behave in regards to feelings? Were they demonstrative of their feelings? Were they positive? Were they negative? Were they abusive? Right? Because all of this will have an impact on how we manage our feelings. So were you taught it was okay to show your feelings? Were you taught it was okay to show sadness or anger or hurt or upset? Or did you unconsciously learn, no, it's not okay to feel these feelings? And for example, did you learn to feel ashamed or wrong or bad to feel your feelings? Did you learn either consciously or unconsciously? Usually, as I said, it's unconscious. Did you learn to stuff your feelings down and hide them away? Did you learn to feel embarrassed about having emotions? Because this is usually what is happening for most of us, and that's certainly what happened to me. But the thing is, I didn't know this was happening. So here are some examples of what we could call negative emotions. Things like sadness, anger, hurt, guilt, shame, fear, anxiety, depression, boredom, loneliness. And when I say negative, I don't mean that they're bad. It just means that they feel bad, right? There's a difference. No emotions are bad, but they feel uncomfortable. And they have a reason for feeling uncomfortable, which we're going to see in a minute. And the problem is, most of the time, we do not even know we're suppressing our emotions. And when I work with clients, before we work together, people fill in a form. And often what I see people saying is things like, I don't know what I'm feeling, or I don't know how to deal with my feelings, or I was always told it wasn't okay to have feelings. But a lot of us don't even know that we're suppressing our emotions until we turn up with illness. And that's really interesting. And one of the main therapies that I use is mycotherapy. And in mycotherapy, we say that symptoms are loud emotions. So if we're experiencing symptoms, then usually there's going to be an emotional component to it underneath, but those emotions have been missed. So they're in the background, they are there, but we don't know they're there. But just because we don't know they're there doesn't mean that they're not there. So the question is, how do you know if you're feeling feelings? Do you know how to tell, for example, if you're feeling an emotion, if you're feeling sadness, or if you're feeling angry, or if you're feeling hurt? Do you know how to tell? Because we've got to learn how to identify if we're feeling an emotion. we need to learn how to do that. And actually, it's not learn, it's relearn, because we're actually born with the ability to do this, but we train ourselves out of using that ability. So we have to retrain ourselves to reconnect ourselves to ourselves, and we have to retrain ourselves to feel our emotions. So my question to you is, do you know how to tell if an emotion is buried inside of you, or if there's something going on inside of you, but you're not quite sure what it is? And do you know what the signs are? So here are some inner signs of stuck emotions, and there are many more. I'm just giving a few here. An inner sign means it's how we're feeling inside. We may feel real sort of lethargy and blahness. It's like, oh God, I just can't be bothered to do anything. I can't be bothered to get out of bed or off the couch. I can't be bothered to go for a walk. I can't be bothered to go and do anything fun. I can't be bothered to ring a friend. It's like this real feeling of I can't be bothered to do anything, which we could say is lethargy. Another sign would be irritability and impatience. And there could be many reasons for that irritability and impatience, but it is a sign that there is stuck emotions inside the body. We can feel uninspired, which is similar to the lethargy, really. We can have anxiety, because that's a sign that we've just got a whole heap of emotions that we're not dealing with. We can have depression, and depression is a sign that we're actually depressing our emotions, and we're depressing a whole heap of emotions. And another sign will be that we're unwell. I can pretty much say that if somebody is ill, there's going to be an emotional component to it. And what are the outer signs that we have emotions that we're not dealing with? Well, we may have difficulty relating with others. We may get into arguments, or we may retract ourselves from having conversations and relationships with others. We find it difficult to relate with others. We may feel a lack of excitement in what we're actually doing. So if we're doing a job, then we may feel that, we're not enjoying it. We're going to have a lack of abundance, because if we don't clear our inner life, it's like a block to attracting what we want into our life. And we're generally going to find that life is not going the way we want it to go, because the truth is our outer world is a reflection of our inner world. So whatever is turning up in our outer world is a reflection of our inner world. And if our outer world is not looking like what we want it to look like, or it's not feeling like how we want it to feel like, then there's probably going to be some emotional stuff that we need to sort out. So let's get into part one. Why do we have emotions, and how and why emotions are generated in the body? So the question is, do emotions have a purpose, or are they completely random? And one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Mickle is, emotions arise as waves of truth from within. And the more emotionally aware we become, the more we're going to see that emotions do in fact arise within the body. There is also a connection at the emotional brain center in the brain, but the feeling of those emotions is actually in the body. And if anybody says, well, I can't feel my emotions in my body, then that's usually a sign that there is quite a disconnection there, because they do arise in the body. And again, here are the examples that I used before of some of these emotions which arise from within the body: sadness, anger, hurt, guilt, shame, fear, anxiety, depression, boredom, loneliness. And then we have positive emotions too. It's not just the negative ones. We have positive emotions, and that is what we're wanting to experience more of. We want to experience more happiness, joy, love, peace, generosity, calm, courage, trust, respect, gratitude. And in ancient China, they don't call these emotions, they call them virtues. These are what are called virtuous energies, which we are here to cultivate. And the interesting thing is, these virtues or positive emotions are already inside of us. And this was a big aha moment for me when I was doing my training on how to clear emotions, was when I found out that these emotions, these positive feelings, are already inside of us. And if you imagine you have the sun, and the sun is the positive emotions, and then you have clouds, which are the negative emotions, our job is to clear away the negative emotions or the clouds so that we can have the sun shine, because the sun is always there. Now, it may not feel like that if you're experiencing all the negative stuff a lot of the time. It's not going to feel like that at all. And in fact, it may feel quite unbelievable that all this good stuff is inside you. But that is actually the truth. And we can increase that as well through learning how to master our emotions. But it's really important to know that it's already there. The question is, what is the purpose of emotions? And the answer is, they are there to give us information about ourselves and our environment. They are a feedback system from inside our body. And they are here to keep us on track in life and to stay true to ourselves and to fulfill our purpose. They have a very, very intelligent purpose. And if I look back to 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I had no idea that I had emotions going on inside of me, or that they had an intelligent purpose. So why are they there? They're there because we are meant to be happy, we're meant to be healthy, and we need to be safe. And those are really prerequisites, if you like, for a human being. And we know that. We're always seeking happiness. We want to be healthy, and we need to be safe. And essentially, ultimately, just at an organic level, we need to stay alive, right? A human being needs to stay alive because otherwise they're not alive, right? So we have this amazing emotional feedback system inside our body to steer us in life. And when we're on the right track, it's going to be sending us things like joy and happiness and peace. And we're going to experience that. And when we're off track, it's going to send us all the other so-called negative emotions to tell us that we're off track and that we need to get back on track. So, for example, let's say somebody has been treated badly by someone. In mycotherapy, we call it unfair treatment. And it could be anything from being minorly treated badly by somebody who doesn't, they're not really meaning to be unfair or mean or horrible, but they just are, to somebody who really is really nasty and abusive. So there are many different levels of being treated badly. But the question is, if you're being treated badly, how do you feel about that? What emotion will your body very intelligently send you if you're not being treated well by someone? And for example, what emotion will your body send you if you're being neglected? Imagine you're growing up and you're not getting the attention that you need or deserve. How are you going to feel? We're going to feel a lot of different emotions, right? And that is feedback and is perfectly normal. So let's look at some of these levels of communication of how our body actually does feedback to us. Our body has this amazing internal feedback system, and it is sensing all the time what is going on in our environment from the moment we're born, and even really actually in the womb. It just has this automatic feedback system, you could say pre-installed software that senses what is going on in the environment so that it's keeping us alive and it's keeping us safe. And the thing with safety is it's not just physical safety, it's emotional safety as well. So it has this feedback system. And the first level of feedback will be a sensation. And so, for example, say you feel hungry, your body sends you a sensation. And then you know that you feel hungry. And that sensation is recognized or recognized in the brain. And we know that we feel hungry because we've translated that sensation into a thought in our brain. And we know that we need to do something about it, which means we need to eat. For a baby, their way of translating it will be they'll feel that sensation and then they might cry, for example. So another example of a sensation at a body level would be needing to go to the toilet. It's a body sensation. It is a automatic feedback sensation from the body saying, you need to take care of me. You need to look after me. You need to take me to the toilet. So our body is sending back these sensations all the time. But the interesting thing is, even though we may be very well trained in listening to sensations to go to the toilet or to eat, we don't seem to be trained very well in other sensations. And that's because of how we learn from the people around us and how they respond or don't respond to what's going on inside them. And so we train ourselves out of listening to these sensations. But our body needs to send us this information because it believes it's very important for its life. And so it will escalate to emotions and stress. So say, for example, somebody grows up in an environment, in a family where there's a lot of arguing between the parents. That will create sensations of discomfort inside the body. And there's not much time gap, if you like, between when a sensation becomes an emotion and stress. But it will quickly escalate to, for example, an emotion of fear. And that will also trigger the stress response in the body. And emotions and stress are different. Emotions are emotions, and stress is the stress response. But they go together. And so their body will send them an emotion of fear, for example, because they may be fearing that, oh, if mummy and daddy split up, then, you know, who will I go with? Or I'm going to lose one of my parents. And so there's a fear of loss. And that creates a lot of stress and a lot of fear. Now, this happens again and again and again. We're talking hundreds and thousands of times that this goes on. And eventually for people, if they really train themselves early on in their life, usually in the first 7 to 10 years of life, if they train themselves not to listen or feel those emotions, which is very difficult at an early age, because we need people to tell us it's okay to feel that emotion. We need people to recognize that we're feeling an emotion, because often the adults around us, they don't even recognize how we're feeling because they're not recognizing it for themselves. And so we train ourselves again and again and again not to feel our emotions, and then we end up later down the track with symptoms. And that's just how it works. So to give you an example of a sensation turning into a symptom, I remember when I went for this job and I went for an interview and it was going swimmingly well and I was really quite excited about the job. And then the person who was interviewing me told me how much the salary was, and it was really pitiful. And my gut just did a turn. It just literally did this sort of 360-degree turn inside in my gut, literally in my gut. And that was my body intelligence telling me this isn't right for you. But then what happened was my head came in and rationalized away what my gut had just told me, and I ignored the sensation. And I took the job, even though I wasn't happy with the salary. There were other things that I was happy with, but I was definitely not happy with the salary, and I didn't feel like I was being valued enough. But the problem was, because I didn't value myself enough, I took the job. And I went into fear of thinking, oh, well, I won't get another job, which was just, that actually wasn't true, but it felt true at the time. And then what happened was, over time, I was working for the company, and I started to build up frustration because I was working really, really hard, as I always do, always giving over 100% and doing a really, really good job, and they were very happy with me. But underneath, without me really, I wasn't really recognizing it, I wasn't acknowledging it, I was feeling really, really frustrated because I was giving so much and getting so little in return. And then the chronic fatigue started to build up inside of me, and that was actually the job that I left with chronic fatigue. So it took about a year for all that to happen. Now, it wasn't just that job that was the problem with that it was my whole life before that, right? This was just really the final straw where my body had built up so much emotion inside and so much habit of not valuing myself and pushing myself too hard, etc., that finally it sort of took me out so that I could look at this and sort it out. And that's how it works. our body will take us out eventually through a chronic illness if we're not listening to ourselves, and we need to make changes. Another important point here is to talk about the fact, very briefly, that we have 3 brains. We literally have 3 brains, and science has proven that we have 3 brains. We have a brain in our head, a brain in our heart, a brain in our gut. And in the Emotional Mastery series, I'll be going into this in more detail. But just to mention here, the fact that science has now proven, and actually ancient Chinese masters have known this for thousands of years, and we also study this in Qigong, the fact that we have 3 brains, and each brain is designed to do a different job. And we need to learn what these jobs are. We need to learn what each brain is there for and how to use them together as a team. Because most people are just using the head brain, and they've really disconnected themselves from the heart and how it communicates to them and its role, and they've disconnected themselves from the gut. So when I said I had that my gut turned, basically that was my gut brain telling me this isn't right for you, but I didn't listen to it at the time. And this is what a lot of us are doing, is we're just not listening to what our body is telling us. So we had our question a little while back, do emotions serve a purpose? And yes, they absolutely do. They are internal feedback from inside of us. And the question is, are you noticing them, and are you acting upon their guidance? Because if we do, we're going to keep going in the right direction. And if we don't, we're going to keep going more off track. And as I said before, illness is a sign that we're off track and we need to get back on track. Or unhappiness is a sign that we're off track and we need to get back on track. The question is, if you are noticing them or half noticing them, but you're not acting upon them, why not? And usually there's a reason for that, but it's sort of rooted deep in our psyche, and we have to work that out so that we can act differently. So emotional stuckness is the next part that I'm going to talk about today. And what I mean by that is, well, why and how do emotions get stuck in the body? And these 2 sayings here, I could have picked many more, but these are always very pertinent. Feelings buried alive never die. And all emotions, even those that are suppressed and unexpressed, have physical effects. Unexpressed emotions tend to stay in the body like small ticking time bombs. They are illnesses in incubation. What I'm trying to get across here is the fact that if we have emotions from our past or from the present that we're not aware of or we're not dealing with, they will stay in the body and they will cause a problem. And that problem will either be we'll be unhappy or we'll be ill. So why is it that emotions get stuck? Well, because everything is energy. According to the law of physics, energy cannot be destroyed, but it can be transformed. So, for example, water can turn into ice or steam, but it won't just disappear. That is a law of physics. And quantum physics, which is more recent studies in physics, and it goes to a quantum level, which is a much smaller magnification level than just physics. So physics really deals with things at a cellular level, whereas quantum physics deals with things at a quantum level, which is 1,000,000 times smaller than cellular level. And the fact is that everything is energy. And science has now proven this. A human being is solidified energy. Even though we feel very solid, a human being is solidified energy, which means that all parts of ourselves are energy. And the way I like to look at it is that we're made up of physical, emotional, mind, and spiritual. And then also we have another layer really which connects everything, which is energy. But all those different 4 layers, physical, mind, emotion, spiritual, they are energy too. They're just different type of energy. So we have to remember that emotions are a form of energy. And what most people do is, and they say it in their words, so like watch your words when you're talking about your feelings. People swallow them, they stuff them down, they push them down, or they ignore them, which means that they're getting stuck in the body. They're staying in the body. And as that saying goes, feelings buried alive never die. just because they're being swallowed or stuffed down or pushed down does not mean they disappear. They are very much there, and they are there until they get cleared, and that is just a fact, because they're energy, and energy cannot be destroyed. But the good news is energy, including emotional energy, can be transformed. So we can transform that energy, and we can even clear it out of our body. So another thing that people tend to say is, instead of dealing with the emotions, they will just get on with it, or they will push on through, or they will battle on. So in other words, we ignore how we're feeling, but the interesting thing is most of the time we're not aware that we're ignoring how we're feeling, right? There's quite a lack of awareness around this, and we just get on with life. But eventually we end up getting ill if that goes on too long. So the energy stays trapped in the body, and it then rewires the cells into a state of dis-ease. And the word dis-ease says it all. Disease is dis-ease. Ideally, we want to feel ease, and if we're not feeling ease, then we're going to feel dis-ease, and that is what disease is. So I want to talk about what we call shock moments, or a Yudin moment, and this comes from metamedicine. And these moments are very important moments in our life. We can feel emotions in many different ways, and we can feel negative emotions in many different ways, but one way of emotions really getting trapped in the body is when we have what is called a Yudin moment. And a Yudin moment means that it is an unexpected event, which is very dramatic, where we feel really isolated and we don't have a strategy. So that's UDIN, a Yudin moment. So for example, a few months ago, I went over to see my landlord, and they said they wanted to talk to me about something, but it wasn't important. Wasn't, anything big or important. And so I went over and I said, so what is it that you want to talk about? And they said, oh, it's nothing important, but you have to move out of your house. Now that was totally unexpected. For me, it was very dramatic, because finding a new place to live that is affordable in Auckland is just about impossible. It was isolating because I didn't have anybody that felt like I could turn to help me to find somewhere else to live. And at that point, in that moment of time when they said it to me, I had no strategy. So the interesting thing was, because I know this stuff, I was observing myself having this Yudin moment as it was happening. So I was experiencing the moment, and at the same time, I was observing it and like a witness and watching it happen. And that's what happens. The more aware you become, you can be experiencing a situation, but at the same time witnessing it. And so that was good, because most people, most of the time, when we have these Yudin moments, especially when we're younger, we don't have that awareness. And so the Yudin moment just happens. The shock, trauma just happens. And in that moment, energy is generated that affects our heart and our gut and our head brains, and also affects a particular organ. And I'm going to talk about this more in another webinar. But basically, that energy rises within the body in a second, in a trice, and then it gets locked into the body and locked into the cells, and it's a trauma or a shock. So, for example, the energy here could have been fear. It was fear, right? So if we don't know that a Yudin moment is we know that a shock moment has happened, but we're not usually aware of the emotional energy that's being generated, and we're not usually aware that that emotional energy has got stuck and trapped in our body. And these are big life moments, or they can be big life moments, which really can create havoc, and we need to know how to clear this sort of energy. And normally we need help with clearing these sort of shock moments. Now, this isn't the only way that emotional energy gets trapped in the body. This is just a severe way, if you like. And if you think about your life, you can think back to, okay, what Yudin moments might I have had in my life where something unexpected happened that was really dramatic, I felt really isolated, and I didn't have a strategy. And I can assure you, you're probably going to find some answers there. And if the emotional consequence of that moment has not been cleared, and usually it has to be done fairly consciously through some sort of processing technique, then it's quite likely still to be inside you. And these are the sort of moments that I look for when I'm working with people. And in our first session, we look at their whole life and we look at everything that is set up illness. And usually there will be some you-didn't moments in there, or at least one. And then the other way that emotions can get trapped in the body is through ongoing emotional things going on. So if we have a situation that is ongoing, like, for example, you grew up in a family and every day you're put down by a parent and you're spoken to meanly, then every day your body will be generating an emotional response to that, and that will be building up, building up, building up, building up. And as we say in Mikkel therapy, that emotion goes into the pot and it builds up and it builds up until it starts to overflow. There are many ways of emotions being generated and then trapped in the body. What we have to do is we have to start becoming more emotionally aware. That's step one. We have to start becoming more aware of how we're feeling. And this really is what I call emotional alchemy, and it's what the ancient Chinese called alchemy, because we can literally learn how to change and dissolve and transform and clear this emotional energy from inside the body. And the point here is that we can learn to do it for ourselves. Now, there's a certain amount that we do. I find that we're always going to need help from other people for some things, because we always have what is called our dark side of the moon, and we can never, ever, ever, however aware we are, we can never see all of our stuff ourselves. It's just not possible, right? Unless you're a super self-realized master. But most human beings are not that. So we're always going to need help. But having said that, the thing that really excites me is to give people the tools to do it for themselves. I want to empower people to be able to take control of their health and their happiness and their life. That excites me. And the more I can do that, then the happier I personally am. I'm really, really not interested in helping to fix people. I want to show people how to do it for themselves. We can learn how to transform our emotional energy, which means, first of all, we have to learn to identify it, and then we can learn and know how to transform it. And we can do that. And we can even heal chronic illness by learning how to do this, because learning to manage emotions is absolutely essential if we want to heal illness. So the first step for you to go away from this webinar is to start noticing what is going on inside your body, and to start noticing how you feel. And the trap here, which we've had for most of our life often, is that unconsciously we have been afraid to feel our feelings, and we don't know how to feel our feelings, and it feels scary. And that's because of all the programming and the conditioning and the beliefs that are tied up with that back to childhood. But one of the things that we have to learn, and that we can learn, is that we don't have to be scared of our feelings, and we don't have to be scared of feeling our feelings. And interestingly enough, I remember years ago learning that a feeling bad is actually not the feeling that feels bad. It's the resisting feeling the feeling that feels bad. So I'll say that again. The feeling itself is not the problem. It is resisting feeling that feeling that creates the bad feeling. So we have to learn, and we can learn, how to clear these emotions. But the first step is emotional awareness. So I'd like you to go away and to start becoming more emotionally aware by simply asking yourself, how am I feeling? What am I feeling? And if you don't ask the question, then you won't get the answer. So when I was training myself to feel my feelings and notice my feelings, and the only way that I knew that I had feelings was because I was exhausted. So I didn't actually know what the feeling was. I just knew that it was there, and it was underneath the exhaustion. And that could be, the exhaustion was my symptom. People have different symptoms. It could be pain. It could be exhaustion. The point is that the emotion sits underneath the symptom. But I had to ask myself, what am I really feeling? And we have to stop when we do that. We literally have to stop. We have to sit down. It's even better if you can close your eyes. You have to go inside and you have to ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? And the first step is to actually recognize that feeling and label it. Oh, okay, I'm feeling angry. Oh, I'm feeling sad. Oh, I'm feeling hurt. Find out what that feeling is and then acknowledge it without any judgment. That is the first step, and a very, very important step, and it can't be missed. So I want to finish up today's webinar with just recommending a few things. And here's a few books, if you haven't heard of them. Molecules of Emotion by Dr. Candace Pert, who basically did lots of research and found out how emotions really do change the chemistry inside our body. They literally change the cells inside our body. Next book, 5 Elements, 6 Conditions, A Taoist Approach to Emotional Healing, Psychology and Internal Alchemy. And this is written by one of my teachers. And this comes at things from a Chinese perspective of understanding the emotions. And then there's the Emotion Code. I've also trained in the Emotion Code by Dr. Bradley Nelson, which talks about how emotions create illness. And the book Feelings Buried Alive Never Die, which is where that quote comes from. And I also have on my old Mickle Therapy website, mickeltherapy.co.nz, and the page to go to is recommended reading. I also have some other book recommendations on there. It's a non-mobile friendly website. It's very old, but you can get there by going to the link. So the last part of today's webinar is next steps. Now, as I said, obviously we want to reduce all the so-called negative emotions, the ones that don't feel good, and we want to grow our positive emotions. That's the whole goal. And I have trained in many different methods to enable me to do this. And so what I'm going to be launching soon is an emotional mastery series where we're literally going to go through and all these different negative emotions, which is going to take them one by one. And I'm going to have tools and techniques and theory and practice on each of these emotions, because we really need to get really detailed, if you like, into what each of these emotions are. You know, what is sadness? Where is it in the body? What is anger? Why is it there? Where does it come from? How do we deal with it? Hurt, where does it come from? How do we deal with it? Guilt, shame, etc. So this is quite a big project which I'll be rolling out bit by bit probably. I haven't fully decided yet, so I'm just giving you a heads up that this will be coming. And I'm calling it my Emotional Mastery series because it really is going to be emotional mastery. And it's really a consolidation of everything that I've learned over the last 30 years. Taoist emotional healing meditations and Qigong, Mickle therapy, motivational medicine, the emotion code, EFT, multiple brain integration, that's the 3 brain stuff, advanced clearing energetics, meta health, and more. And all of these therapies, I seem to have been drawn to therapies that really focus on emotional clearing, because that has been my path. And what I find really interesting is that some people are more drawn to working with the mind, and that will be things like neurolinguistic programming, NLP, and some people are more drawn to do the emotional side of things. And ultimately, they're both important, but people tend to resonate more with one than the other. It's quite interesting, and it's just it's just our makeup. That will be coming soon, I hope. It's a lot of work to put it together. But in the meantime, if this is the first time that you've come across me and you've not done one of my programs, then I just want to share about the Emotional Health Transformation Program. And I just need to go to another screen to show that, which is this program here. It's a 4-week online series. And here's the Dalai Lama. He says, happiness is the highest form of health. And he's probably right. So the Emotional Health Transformation series goes into depth. It's really about the connection between stress, emotions, and illness or health. Now, the Emotional Mastery series is just going to be really about how to deal with emotions. It's not going to be focusing on illness. obviously it relates to it, because if we don't manage all those emotions, we end up getting ill. But it's really going to be focusing on all the different emotions and how to master them. Whereas this series is the connection between emotion, stress, and illness or health. So it goes into depth in the first week and talks in depth about the stress response and emotions and how that creates symptoms if that goes on. It talks about emotional needs and how we have emotional needs as we're growing up as a child, and has an emotional needs appraisal where there's an exercise to see, well, how much were my emotional needs met or not met as I was growing up, and an exercise to start replenishing those needs, and some emotional clearing techniques, and talks about the organs as well, the connection between the organs and the emotions. And then it goes into emotional empowerment. So it's really quite a comprehensive introduction to stress, emotions, and illness. And people have had some amazing results and insights from watching this or going through this program. So what I'm offering on today, I don't know how long I'll keep this going, for a week at least. But if you want to get hold of this program, then I'm offering 50% as a listener to this webinar. And so you just have to go to kimknighthealth.mykajabi.com and find the Emotional Health Transformation series and put in the code EQS, and that will give you 50% off this program, which will give you a really, really good head start if you're wanting to understand the connection between emotion, stress, and health. So next time, we're going to be looking more at where emotions are stored in the body and which organs they're connected to, and also the connection between the brain and organs and our environment and emotional themes. So different emotions will affect the body in different ways and have what we call a theme. And so if certain things are happening in our life, then it's likely to affect different organs or different tissues. It's not just internal organs. It could be any part of our body. It could be the bones, could be internal organs, could be the muscles. So there's always a meaning in whatever happens to us emotionally, and it plays out somehow in the body. So it's very, very fascinating stuff. And the thing about learning how to manage and master our feelings is this doesn't happen overnight. As I said, I trained myself literally non-stop. Every day I would sit down and do these exercises every day for 7 years, right? And that really took me to a whole new place in terms of understanding my feelings, my emotions, and understanding myself. And I would not have got there if I hadn't done that daily practice. So, we have to put in the effort. We have to put in the time. If we want to get to a place of emotional mastery or mastery in anything, we have to put in the time and effort. And often it's only because we're driven to do that by a crisis that we think, oh my goodness, I've just had enough of this and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Now, fortunately for me, yes, I had got to a crisis because it was in 95 that I was ill and left work. And by the time I came across this information about emotions, that was 5 or 6 years, or 5 years later, I think. And I remember when I did learn this information, what was really great was that I was so excited by it that it actually wasn't hard to do it. I just wanted to do it. It really intrigued me and it really excited me. And so I did the work. But we have to do the work. If we're going to do it ourselves, we have to do the work. And that's what I want people to do. I want them to master themselves. So yeah, the question is what to do when you recognize you're having a Yudin moment. And that's a really good question. So what happened for me in that moment? Because I know I've had many Yudin moments before then, but I think that was the first time that I had a big Yudin moment where I'd actually learned the Yudin theory, if that makes sense. So before I had no idea what was happening, and so it just happened. But this time I knew it. And so as it was happening, I was feeling the shock and the upset inside of me. And I knew that I had to leave and I needed to go away, and I needed to go away and process my feelings. So I remember walking back to the house, and I just basically burst into tears and felt the shock and the pain and the hurt and the fear, and I allowed myself to feel it. So this is step one of any emotional processing, is that we have to give ourselves permission to feel what we're feeling, because if we do that, then that information can start to clear from the cells, and so that's what I did. But that brought up a whole bigger heap of stuff, which I'm not going to go into now, which took me about 3 months to process. It was a big thing that I went through as a result of that, and I'm not going to go through that in this introductory series. I might go into it in the mastery series, but it was a very big thing that came up with a very big life lesson of having to go way back into my past to clear some even much bigger stuff. So this is what can happen, is that often even though we may be having a shock in the moment, it also is re-triggering something from the past. So it can get quite complex. But in answer to the question, what do you do when you recognize you're having a Yudin moment? Then it's about recognizing it, recognizing the feeling, and allowing oneself to feel it. And somebody said, well, how do you clear or process Yudin moments from the past? Well, that's not a question that can be answered in 2 seconds on a webinar like this. Again, that's the sort of thing that we'll be going into in the Emotional Mastery series. So there's a lot of information to share, as you can see, on how to process emotions. I sort of have a helicopter view now on all of it. I can look down and look down at anger or sadness or hurt or whatever and go, okay, this is what you need to do for that, and this is what you need to do for that, and this is what you need to do for that. But probably most of the people that I'm speaking to, they're more on ground level, and so it's not so easy and clear to see how to do everything. And so we have to learn to do things step by step. And this is not something that we can rush through and do overnight. And this is really important to remember with any healing or health issue. And it's one of the biggest challenges that I have as a therapist is really helping people to understand that managing our emotions and clearing unhappiness or illness in life is not an overnight process. Do not expect it to be an overnight process. This is a lifelong process. It doesn't mean it's going to take a whole life to get well, but it is a lifelong process to learn and implement these techniques and to manage our health and happiness. And it's always going to be ongoing. Once we've got ourselves well, for example, then we still have to use these techniques on a daily basis to maintain our health and to improve our happiness. So personal development is not a 1 week or a 1 month or a 3 month process. It is a lifelong commitment. I think it's really important to know that, so that you don't have false expectations of thinking that you can sort your life out in 1 week or 1 month. It just doesn't happen like that. Even though medical science may tell you, yes, go and get an antidepressant and you'll be fine, you just get on with your life. That's actually not how it works. There's a lot more we have to do. As I said, if you want, there is the Emotions and Stress and Health program, which is quite comprehensive in terms of talking about emotions and stress and how to reduce symptoms. Well worth investing in if this is your first time coming into this information.